a problem in accepting and keeping God's word. And then the last and great promise is that the power in his word is that in keeping his word, our keeping his word brings great reward, great protection, great cover for us as we follow him. The balance of Psalms 19 here, David prays and has conversation with God in verses 12 and 14. He says this: who can understand his errors? If we understood our errors, if we understood God's word faithfully, then we would not continue to err, to sin. But God says, can man really understand it? Then he turns to God as a response to that and asks God to keep me from secret faults. Keep back your servant, push him away from presumptuous sin, pleading with God for power over sin. In verse 13, David says to God in this prayer, let them not have dominion over. Give me the strength to stand up to them. And then verse 14 is one of perhaps the most impressive quoted Bible verses. It says, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord. For you are my strength and you are my Redeemer. We've looked at this verse in this chapter in Old Testament Bible character David and his relationship with God. It was typical of any of the Old Testament persons that we read about in the scripture. And back to Genesis, in chapter 12, 1 through 3, God sets a thing in motion when he promised to make of Abraham's lineage, and all because of Abraham's faith in God, unwavering faith to God, God sent him to a new land. On God's word only. He had never been to that land. He had never seen that. He possessed about all there was to possess where he was. But he went to a land where he was totally dependent upon God. He gave up what he had and went with God. The whole purpose was to isolate and defend Abraham's descendants, his bloodline, if you will, pure for the bringing of Jesus Christ, the promised one in Genesis 12 to Abraham. We're going to bring another lesson when I'm here the next time. And we were going to look at the question, too long for this lesson, to ask this question: how does God's plan for man move from a specially designed physical protection of a family, that being the Jews, to the New Testament biblical covenant of God with his son Jesus Christ, which deals not so much with the physical protection and promise, but deals with the spiritual relationship that he promised man could have with the Father. So in closing, we're going to ask you to read in I didn't write the book down. I believe it's Luke 14, verses 21 through 28. Sorry, let me verify that. 14, it's Acts chapter 14, 21 through 28. All the way through chapter 15, all 31 verses there. So read that, and we will discuss some of that today. David said that God's word was perfect and convert the soul. And while we have not talked about this morning the evidence that Jesus presents to us for the purpose of realigning ourselves with God, to having our sin forgiven, has not been the lesson, but it is to set the groundwork for answering the question, how does God, and the chapters in Acts portray some of the problems that people in the New Testament was having in bringing God's word from that physical relationship with man to the spiritual relationship which he desired under Jesus Christ. If you know what the Bible teaches about being a child of God, and you have not given your life to him, you've not been baptized, if you'd like to talk about that, if we can engage in prayer or help you in any way, we are going to sing a song. And if we can help you, please let us know at that time.